All right. Hey, everyone. Welcome back. Ready for another deep dive.
Let's do it.
Awesome. So today we're tackling something called the Pratfall Effect. You ever notice how, like, sometimes when someone messes up, it actually makes them kind of more likable?
Oh, yeah, definitely.
We're going to dig into that. We've got a few different sources. There's this Learning Loop article, which is a little more on the researchy side. Then we've got the Thinking Bat newsletter with some interesting takes. And we'll also look at how brands use this in choice hacking.
Sounds like we've got a good mix.
Yeah, so basically by the end of this, we're going to try to figure out the psychology of why this works and maybe even see if we can, like, use it to our advantage.
Well, I think a key point here right off the bat is this idea of perceived competence. The pratfall effect, it really hinges on that. Like, if you're already seen as someone who's, competent and capable, little blunder here or there, it can actually make you more appealing.
Okay, so it's not like a free pass to just mess everything up.
Right, exactly. If you're still trying to prove yourself, well, those mistakes might not have the same effect.
Makes sense. So talk to me a little more about this whole perceived competence thing.
Hmm.
How does that make someone more likable?
Think about it this way. People who seem like perfect all the time, it can be kind of intimidating. They're up on this pedestal and it's hard to relate.
Yeah, for sure. It's like, oh, look at you, Mr. or Ms. Perfect.
Right. But when they make a mistake, even a small one, it humanizes them. Suddenly it's like, oh, they're just like us.
Flawed, but trying their best.
Exactly. And that makes them more approachable, maybe even endearing.
So Thinking Bat had this great anecdote about a math teacher who totally fits this.
Oh, yeah, with the table.
Yeah. So she's like this super strict math teacher, almost robotic.
Yeah.
But then one day, she stubs her toe and yells at the table
And instead of everyone being turned off, the author actually develops a little crush on her.
because that little outburst, that frustration, made her seem, I don't know, more real.
Less intimidating.
Okay, so clumsy is the new sexy. Is that what we're learning here?
No, hold on. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. There's actually this study from way back in 1966 from the University of Texas that Thinking Bat mentions.
Okay.
And they found that when someone who's already seen as competent makes a blunder, it actually increases their attractiveness.
Interesting.
But here's the catch. The same blunder, but on someone who's seen as more mediocre, it actually did the opposite. It decreased their attractiveness.
Ah, okay. So it really depends on, like, the context, the perception people already have of you.
Exactly.
I'm starting to see the bigger picture now.
Good. And this idea of perceived competence, it's not just limited to like everyday life. It even plays out online, especially with like content creators. Thinking Bat uses Paris Chopra as an example.
Oh, yeah, I know him. Super smart guy. Great content.
Right, very insightful. But he can come across as a bit, well, too perfect.
Yeah, I see what you mean. It can be kind of off-putting sometimes. Like, oh, look at you, Mr. Perfect, with all the answers.
And that kind of perfection, it can actually create a barrier. It makes it harder to connect. But then Chopra shared something kind of embarrassing. He admitted to this like huge book buying habit.
Oh, wow.
He was overspending, not exactly perfect behavior. And guess what? People loved it. It instantly made him more relatable. It's like, oh, okay, this brilliant guy, he also struggles with things just like us.
Suddenly, he's not so intimidating anymore.
Yeah.
So even in the online world where everyone's trying to, like, project this perfect image,
Yeah.
a little vulnerability can go a long way.
It's about letting people see the human behind the curated feed.
Right, the person behind the persona.
Exactly.
I like that. And choice hacking takes this even further and looks at how brands are using this, the pratfall effect.
Oh, yeah, they have some great examples.
Like Heinz, remember that campaign they did, the whole slow ketchup pour thing?
Oh, yeah, they owned it.
Totally owned it. And then there's KFC turning a chicken shortage into this, like, self-deprecating marketing goal.
It's brilliant how they embrace these flaws, turn them into strengths almost.
Instead of hiding them, they're like, hey, this is us. We're not perfect.
And it works. People connect with that. What's interesting, though, is that they're still staying true to their core. You know what I mean? Like KFC, it's still the place to go for fried chicken. Heinz still makes ketchup.
Right.
They're just using humor and a little self-awareness to build that connection with their audience.
And choice hacking also points out something kind of counterintuitive, how too much perfection can actually backfire. Like if you see a product and it's got only glowing reviews, makes you a little suspicious.
Oh, for sure.
Like, is this too good to be true?
Yeah, you start to wonder, what are they hiding?
It goes back to that need for authenticity. We want real, we want genuine.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we've seen this play out with people, with brands, but what about like actual products? Like the stuff we buy. Does this apply there too?
Yeah, it does. And Learning Loop really gets into this idea of acknowledging mistakes, especially during product development. They actually argue that it's better to be upfront about those bugs and glitches.
Like own up to them.
Yeah, be transparent. They say it actually builds trust with users.
So it's kind of like saying, hey, we messed up. We're working on it.
Right. It shows that you're human. You're not afraid to admit when things aren't perfect.
And that can be really powerful.
Yeah, especially in building loyalty. Because it also shows that you're committed to getting better. You're not just going to sweep those mistakes under the rug.
Okay, so I'm getting it. Transparency, willingness to learn, all that good stuff. But now I'm thinking about how this applies to personal relationships. We all want to, put our best foot forward, but is there a point where trying to be too perfect can actually hurt us?
That's a really great question.
Yeah, I mean, does it backfire?
Well, thinking back brought up this example from Parks and Recreation. Remember Leslie Knope's boyfriend, the super organized Chris Traeger?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
They highlight a scene where Ann Perkins, who's pregnant, is going through all these pregnancy struggles.
Yeah.
And Chris, he's trying so hard to be, the perfect supportive partner.
He's got a solution for everything.
Exactly. But it totally backfires because Anne, she doesn't want him to fix everything. She just wants him to acknowledge her feelings, validate her experience.
Yeah, he was missing the point entirely.
Right. And I think it highlights this thing that can happen, especially for men, where this desire to appear perfect, it actually gets in the way of real connection.
Yeah.
Because it creates this barrier.
Where real emotions, real vulnerability can't get through.
Exactly.
So even in relationships, authenticity is key.
Yeah.
Trying to maintain this facade of I'm perfect, I've got it all together.
Yeah.
It can actually prevent us from forming those deep connections that we all crave.
It's so true. And that's where the pratfall effect can be so powerful. It allows us to let our guard down a bit, to be our authentic selves, flaws and all.
And that's what creates space for real intimacy.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, I am loving this so far. We've seen how the pratfall effect works across so many different areas of life, personal relationships, online, even brand marketing. But now I'm really curious about the how. How do we actually use this in our lives? How can we embrace those imperfections without, becoming a walking disaster?
That's the million-dollar question, right? And it's something that we'll dive into in the next part of our deep dive.
Can't wait. So we've kind of established that the pratfall effect, it's not just about tripping in public and hoping someone thinks it's cute.
Right. It's definitely more nuanced than that.
What I'm really curious about is the how.
Yeah.
How do we actually use this in our lives?
Well, the Learning Loop article, they talk about finding that sweet spot, between showcasing your competence, letting people know you're good at what you do, and letting your guard down a little.
Showing that you're not a robot.
Exactly. And it's not about intentionally making mistakes, of course.
Right.
But it's more about being open about the ones you do make.
So it's kind of hey, look, I'm really good at this, but I'm not perfect.
Yeah. And the way you frame those mistakes is important too. Let's say you're leading a team at work. You could share a story about a time you messed up and what you learned from it.
Oh, that's a good idea.
It shows your team, first of all, that it's okay to make mistakes.
Yeah.
You're not expecting them to be perfect.
You're human too.
Exactly. And that learning and growing from those mistakes, that's more important than always being right.
Totally.
And it also kind of models that vulnerability. It shows them it's okay to be open about their struggles too.
It creates a totally different culture.
Right, like a culture of trust, and
Yeah.
learning instead of one that's all about fear and blame.
I love that. Now, we were talking earlier about how the pressure to be perfect, it can be really strong, especially for men. Do you think that plays a role in how, how they might approach this whole pratfall effect thing?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, think about it. There's this huge societal expectation for men to be the strong, silent type, the problem solver.
Always in control.
Right. And that can make it a lot harder for them to embrace vulnerability. But, the truth is, everyone needs to be able to let their guard down sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, it's essential if you want to build those real, genuine connections.
Exactly.
It's if you're always trying to project this image of, I'm perfect, I've got it all figured out, well, that can be really isolating.
Oh, for sure. And it can actually prevent you from getting the support that you might need.
Yeah, it's like you're building walls instead of bridges.
That's a great way to put it. And there's research in Learning Loop that actually suggests that people who are able to admit their weaknesses, ask for help when they need it, they're often seen as even more competent overall.
Really? That's so interesting. So it's not even just about being likable.
Hmm.
It's also about how that vulnerability can actually boost your credibility in the long run.
Because it shows self-awareness.
Right.
Right, right. You understand your limitations, you're willing to learn, to grow. That's a sign of true strength, not weakness.
Okay, I'm totally on board with all of this.
Yeah.
But are there any potential downsides to the pratfall effect? I mean, is there a risk of overdoing it?
Oh, definitely. Like anything, you got to approach it with a bit of, balance.
Awareness.
Yeah, you don't want to just be a walking disaster.
Right, exactly. And choice hacking, they actually warn against this, admitting to flaws that directly impact, the core function of your product or service, for example.
Like, I'm thinking of a car company. They probably shouldn't be like, hey, our brakes don't always work.
Yeah, that's not going to inspire a lot of confidence. It's about finding those imperfections that are relatable, humanizing.
That don't totally undermine everything.
Right. They should make you more endearing, not less trustworthy.
So it's about being strategic. You're not just like spilling your guts all over the place. Exactly. And Learning Loop also emphasizes that this whole pratfall effect thing, it works best when you've already established, a certain level of competence. If you're brand new at something, if you're just starting out, well, focus on building your skills first.
Right. Get good at what you do first.
Yeah.
Then you can start, showing a little more of that vulnerable side.
Exactly. It's like you got to lay that foundation of competence first. Then you can use the pratfall effect to make yourself more approachable, more relatable, not the other way around.
Okay. That makes a lot of sense.
And it's also super important to be mindful of, your audience. Who are you talking to?
Right. What might work with your friends might not work with your boss.
Exactly. So I guess the key takeaway here is that the pratfall effect, it's not some one-size-fits-all strategy.
You can't just slap it on any situation.
Right. It's about being self-aware, understanding your own strengths and weaknesses, and then using that knowledge to create those genuine connections.
This has been super insightful so far. We've really unpacked the psychology behind this whole thing, explored how it shows up in different parts of our lives. But I'm still kind of wondering about the practical side of things. What are some concrete things people can do to actually embrace those imperfections in a way that feels, authentic and helpful?
Great question. And that is exactly what we are going to delve into in the next part of our deep dive.
Okay, so we've talked about all the sciencey stuff behind the pratfall effect, the benefits, some of the potential pitfalls, all that good stuff. But I think before we wrap up, we got to talk about how we can actually use this.
Yeah, good point.
In real life, what are some things people can do?
One of the most powerful things, I think, is practicing self-compassion.
Oh, that's interesting.
Instead of beating yourself up when you make a mistake, just acknowledge it, learn from it, move on. Everyone messes up sometimes. It's part of being human.
So it's about being kind to ourselves, even when we don't think we deserve it.
Exactly. It's about shifting that perspective, Instead of seeing mistakes as failures, see them as opportunities.
Okay, I messed this up, but what can I learn?
Right. How can I do better next time?
I love that. It takes the pressure off of having to be perfect all the time.
Yeah.
We talked earlier about how vulnerability can be a strength, but it can also be really scary to actually put yourself out there. Any tips on how to, I don't know, how to navigate that?
Yeah, for sure. I think it's good to start small.
Okay.
Maybe you share a small mistake with a close friend or a family member. Just see how it feels. And remember, you don't have to share everything with everyone,
Yeah, that makes sense.
Be selective. What you tell your friends might be different from what you share with, your colleagues or your boss.
So finding that balance between being open and maintaining some boundaries.
Exactly. And also being mindful of the context. What's appropriate to share, depends on the situation.
Right. Work, personal life, it's all different.
Absolutely. So, read the room, trust your gut. Choice hacking talked about how brands use this, the pratfall effect in marketing, but do you think there's a risk of it feeling inauthentic if people try to, use this strategically?
Oh, that's a good question.
Yeah, I mean, it really comes down to intention. Are you sharing these imperfections because you genuinely want to connect? Or are you doing it just for, personal gain? Because if your heart's not in it, people will be able to tell.
Yeah, it'll feel fake.
Right. Authenticity is key.
It can't be a tactic or a trick. It has to come from a real place.
Exactly. And especially if you're using the pratfall effect, professionally, you have to think about the power dynamics.
Ooh, that's a good point.
Like if you're a leader sharing a story about a mistake you made, you got to make sure it's done in a way that, empowers your team.
Not like makes them lose confidence.
Right, exactly. It's about finding that sweet spot between, being vulnerable and still maintaining that sense of like professionalism, competence,
So the goal isn't to like intentionally make yourself look bad. It's about showing that you're human, that you make mistakes.
and that you're not afraid to learn and grow from them. And when you do that, you create the space for other people to do the same.
Ah, I like that. So ultimately, the Pratfall Effect, it's about embracing those imperfections. And it's not just to, make ourselves more likable. It's about those connections.
Exactly. Building those real, authentic, meaningful connections. It's about creating a world where it's okay to be, perfectly imperfect.
I love that. This has been such a great deep dive. We learned a lot about why the Pratfall Effect works, how to use it the right way. So to everyone listening, embrace those quirks, those little missteps, the things that make you you.
Those are the things that make you relatable, make you approachable.
And ultimately, those are the things that make you human. So until next time, happy diving.